Everyone, welcome to the Way Champions podcast. It's your host, John O'Sullivan. Welcome back for another exciting week, another amazing guest. We have been rolling through some pretty awesome guests, and Jerry and I have gotten to read some pretty incredible books, and this week's guest is no different. Now, before we get into that, just a couple of things. Just making sure you've seen, if you are interested in the 2024 Way of Champions Conference, that is being held August 9th, 10th, and 11th. We're going back to Colorado Academy in beautiful Denver, Colorado. It's an amazing, amazing venue. We had so much fun there last year. We got our hotels locked in, got, I think, an even better rate on hotels this year than we did last year, which is awesome. And they are right across the street within walking distance. So if you take an Uber from the airport in Denver, you don't need a car the whole time you're there, which is pretty awesome as well. So you can sign up at changethegameproject.com. Just main menu, it says Way of Champions Conference. Go ahead and do that, and you are good to go. All right. Now, before we dive in here, I want to tell you about our guest, Dr. Mitch Greene. He's a nationally recognized and licensed clinical and sports psychologist. Over the past 15 years, he's worked with different clients, mostly helping athletes pursue their high performance goals, as well as coaches and athletic departments, helping their student athletes with mental wellness and performance enhancement. Most of his clients are college or college-bound student athletes or high-level, even professional competitors. And what he works on is things like loss of confidence, what he calls mind chatter, which we'll talk a lot about, return from injury, performance anxiety when it comes from how we perform in practice to how we perform in games, reacting negatively to mistakes, and so much more. You get it all. His brand new book is called Courage Over Confidence, Managing Mind Chatter and Winning the Mental Game. And it's really good. It's short, it's sweet, it gets right to the point. He ties it in with sort of the state of youth sports today and everything kids face, and gives you some really, really good strategies of why telling people to think positively doesn't always work. Okay. So get ready, get set. You can, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, you can connect with him. His website is Greene Psych, so GreenePSYCH.com. Okay, enough. All right, get ready, get set. Let's go. Dr. Mitchell Greene. Enjoy, everyone. Mitch, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. It's an honor to have you on, and I'm so excited to talk about your new book, Courage Over Confidence.
Thank you, John. It's a long time coming. I'm really excited to be on.
Yeah, well, we have so much ground to cover today, but this idea around your title of Courage Over Confidence was fascinating to me. And when I read your book, I dove right in. And the first story you share in the book is of a Gold Glove second baseman named Chuck Knobloch, who was on the New York Yankees. And I'm a Yankee fan, and I remember living through this of like, how come this guy who's a Gold Glover can't make a 20-foot throw? And so maybe start with that story to introduce this, and then we'll kind of talk about your background and stuff. But I was hooked immediately with that story.
Sure. Well, just to introduce myself, so I got my PhD in clinical psychology here in the suburbs of Philadelphia at Temple University. I'm originally from New York and made my way to Philadelphia. And in graduate school, John, when I was supposed to be doing extra work in stats and personality theory, I was like you, fascinated what was going on back home in New York with the Yankees and Chuck Knobloch, who seemingly out of the blue couldn't throw the ball accurately from second to first base. Some people may remember he wound up underhanding the ball, walking it over to the first baseman and underhanding it, or throwing it wildly. If not, he sometimes threw it so wildly over the first baseman's head that it just was striking how someone could go from an MVP and an all-star Gold Glove to a mental block. And in graduate school, I could not get enough of the Knobloch story. And then it was really about 10 years later, I graduated with my PhD and then was a clinical psychologist or traditional clinical psych for about 10 years. And there was this opportunity for me to make a decision about the rest of my career. And really, the truth is that story never left me. And I was fascinated by it. And I decided to make a 180-degree turn from what I was doing for a living and jump into the wild world of sports,
Mhm.
really with Knobloch as my inspiration.
Mm. And I mean, it's a fascinating story. And for anyone who doesn't know, I'm sure you could Google Chuck Knobloch throws from second base. But what was interesting, if I remember it correctly, was the throws that he struggled the most with were the ones where sort of he had lots of time to think about it, right? Like
Yeah.
when it was a reaction thing, when he was turning a double play, boom, he could do it. But as soon as thought entered something that should have been automatic at that point, that's when he struggled, correct?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, the New York Post journalist wrote, "When Knobloch has time to think, he stinks."
Mm-hmm.
And that was the quote. So you're exactly right. When he was thinking, he was obviously thinking way too much for something that's a reflexive, you know, a reflexive action that he's done thousands and thousands of times. I don't think we ever really got down to what really happened with Knobloch. I mean, he was pretty, of course, back then people really weren't talking about this openly in the way somebody, an athlete, even a pro athlete might now share, some of what might be going on behind the scenes for them. There were lots of theories about performance enhancing drugs and things in his personal life, but I don't really know what the truth of it was. But there are other stories. People know about Steve Sachs. People know something about Rick Ankiel. Those
Yeah.
were also stories that I just gravitated towards, even when I was a full-time clinician. And in many ways, that's sort of what I still do today.
Yeah.
I'm working daily with people who run up against some sort of mental block,
Yeah.
one way or the other.
Well, I wrote about Ankiel in my book, Changing the Game, same thing. And,
Okay.
a
Yeah.
pitcher who was an all-star pitcher who all of a sudden couldn't throw it anywhere near the plate. I mean, it was dangerous. Like people didn't want to hit against him. And then they
Yes,
eventually turned him into an outfielder, if I believe. And I think they turned Knobloch
that's right.
into an outfielder as well.
That's right. Knobloch lasted a few more seasons and then was out of the league. Ankiel actually had more success. Because he was not just, he wound up moving to the outfield, but he was a darn good hitter
Yeah.
for a period of time. He was a dangerous hitter. So he bounced back in a way that Knobloch never really did.
Well, I think, and I don't know any of the backstory of Knobloch, and it doesn't sound like you do either, what they were doing. But I think at that time, right, a couple decades ago, what they would have been doing was someone sitting there to talk about his throwing mechanics. Where's your elbow? Where's your shoulder? Where's your foot? Which
Right.
is, as we know now, the exact wrong thing to talk about and make you
Yeah.
think about it more because now it's becoming explicit and not implicit, right? He didn't need to think about it. He needed to stop
Yeah.
thinking about it.
Yeah. Not only would they be doing that, they'd make sure that he shows up real extra early before the game and gets another 1,000 reps in throwing from second to first. And typically in a scenario like that, he might not have any issue throwing from second to first, 3 hours before the game when there's nobody in the stands and there's no runners on base. And he might think he was cured at that point, plus what you're describing with some technical instruction. But then when the lights are on, so to speak, right, his mind took over.
Yeah. Well, we've had many guests on here who talk about sort of the difference between competence and confidence and how we often label things as, oh, he's confident out there. We're like, he's actually competent out there. And sort of the thesis of your book is sort of the myth that confidence is the prerequisite for athletic success. And in your experience, and certainly the research backs this up, right? I mean, first of all, confidence is not something that I can hand you. Um, but most people out there, even the ones we're watching on TV, even the ones we just watched in the Super Bowl, right? Um, they're not always confident in every moment, are they?
No, it comes and goes. You throw a great pass, score a touchdown, your confidence is high, you get picked off, to some degree, your confidence is gonna take a hit. But particularly for junior athletes who tend to have much more, higher fluctuations of from feeling great to feeling terrible. they are kind of raised with this idea, and many coaches sort of propagate this idea that you just need to get your confidence back, as if the player knows what that means exactly. Or parents are telling kids, and I understand why, I'm a parent as well. We'll
Yeah.
tell kids you just have to be confident. And as you're saying, a lot of times there's nothing direct that they can do. And trying to make yourself, I mean, where my work comes in, yeah, of course, the people who knock on my door and make calls to me aren't feeling confident. So they've already read the books on confidence. They've already said 100 affirmations in the mirror, and it still doesn't work because there's another voice in their head that the second they tell them they're confident, they tell themselves they're confident. That voice reminds them of all the things that could possibly go wrong.
Mhm.
So the way I work is I don't really focus much on trying to be more confident. I teach people how to manage their doubts.
Yeah.
And that kind of turns a lot of what I consider a lot of pop psychology on its head.
Yeah. We had this guy, Wells Thompson, on the podcast. He was a 10-year Major League Soccer, professional soccer player, top college player at Wake Forest, top 5 draft pick. And, he said to us, or what we were talking about is, at that pro level, all of a sudden someone's playing ahead of you. And he said, the whole time I was a pro, when when all of a sudden here's the team sheet and I'm not in it, the first thing in my head was, you suck. You suck
Yeah,
at soccer, right? And
yeah,
here's a guy who's, at the top of the game. He won an MLS Cup. He won
yeah,
Open Cup. I mean, he's doing everything. And yet that's his thing. And I asked him, I said, what percentage of people feel that way? And he's like, it's an amazing amount, even at the highest level, that when things
yeah,
don't go well, that voice in their head, what you call mind chatter, says, you suck. Why are you even here? And so, right. So yes, it's in our kids' heads too, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. But it is the dirty little secret of professional sports, as you referenced, which is there are more guys and gals than you might think. And I know also from working with these people behind the scenes, people you see on TV who are telling me they're freaking out, and who are, Tua Tagliavoa, who's
Yeah.
the Miami Dolphins quarterback, had great success this year. But there's a quote in my book of him looking himself in the mirror as he tells the story and saying, I think I might suck.
Yeah.
Um, and so we want the young people, especially coming up, to not buy into this false narrative that they need to feel a certain way in order to play well, as you said earlier. And I think that's a lot of light bulbs go off for these people, young and not so young, could be Olympians I'm working with, who are coming to realize that if they can manage their doubts better, even if they're not uber confident, they can still play the game the way they, got ready to play.
Yeah. And that comes from this combination of my competence, my work will allow me to perform, and,
Sure.
and realizing, that voice is just, it's not helpful. So don't pay attention to it as much as you might. What shapes that voice that says you suck, you don't belong here? Where does what are all the ingredients of that
Yeah.
stew, if you
Well,
will?
that voice is only, I mean, yes, it's clearly not helpful in the context of playing a tournament game. It's clearly not helpful. But I think I go out of my way to let my clients know there's lots of places where that voice is entirely helpful. Um, sometimes I tell the sort of silly story of going, if I went on a hike with my client and we're walking through the woods for an hour or two, and I say, listen, let's stop because I see this raspberry bush over there. I'm just going to grab some berries and eat them quick because I need a little bit more energy to get to the end of this hike. And the person I'm walking with says, "Yo, doc, those look like raspberries, but I'm not sure those are raspberries. They could be, I'm not sure." The point of this is I would start to have chatter in that situation. Chatter is, for those of you listening, is defined by having doubt, second guessing, and negative thinking. A conversation starts going on in your head full of doubt, second guessing, and negative thinking. And in that context, that chattery voice is protecting me. It's protecting me from getting hurt, right? If we didn't have that voice, I'd just be eating whatever I want to eat along the way. So it's a survival piece. It's a survival mechanism, John. on the soccer pitch, for example, that voice is similarly trying to protect you from getting hurt. In this case, it's not like, eating berries and that kind of injury, that kind of hurt. It's more protecting you from more the psychological piece of the puzzle, which is what if I disappoint? What if I don't prove myself? What if I don't meet expectations, which is really the number one thing that comes up? What if I'm known as the player, I'm known as the starting forward, I'm known as the goal scorer. What if this sort of leads to just embarrassment at a level that I can't survive? And then all of a sudden, that player, if he doesn't know how or she doesn't know how to manage it, is sort of left to their own devices. And those are those players that kind of shrink when the moment feels big, pass when they should be going to the goal and shooting, slow down when they could be speeding up. But I think the thing that I arm my clients with is the understanding that it's supposed to be there,
Yeah.
which is a very different way than most look at it, especially kids who haven't been trained in this, where you think there must be something wrong with me
Right.
because I have this voice that says, you can't, there's a part of me that knows I can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such an important distinction is it's supposed to be there, and now let's train ourselves to
Right.
use it for good, right? Or whatever. And I love
That's
your
right.
distinction of, I mean, as you're talking the Barry story, I'm just thinking, I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I have friends who say, "Hey, let's go pick mushrooms." And my first question is, "Do you know what you're doing?"
That's right.
Because
Yes.
I don't want to learn on your behalf that you actually don't know what you're doing.
That's exactly right. So thank goodness you have a cautious, risk-averse part of your mind that isn't looking for trouble.
Isn't
So
just
good example.
winging it
Yep.
mushroom hunting. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, um, I mean, and I think the problem is that either people don't know or they're told, you know, what's wrong with you, don't be scared or ignore that voice or whatever. Um, and
Right.
and, and we tell people over and over, right, to think positive or whatever, but as you write, it's almost impossible to sustain positive thinking, and especially when it doesn't feel real, right? When you're lying to yourself, it's actually probably the worst thing you can do, correct?
Yeah, I always want to be careful. It's not like I'm totally against somebody saying something positive to themselves when they go out
Right.
on the field, um, or telling themselves to be confident. And because if you've experienced that in a way that feels authentic and it's encouraging and it makes you excited to play, but those aren't the people who come knocking on my door. I
Right.
want to be clear. I'm a therapist at heart. I get people who really are struggling with performance anxiety, mind chatter. Um, and if they try to tell themselves they're really confident when they're not really feeling that way, they actually feel worse than they did beforehand. They feel like I can't even do this freaking confidence thing right, and they're now stuck in a terrible loop. And so it's for those people especially that this type of approach I think really has proven to have great benefit. And sometimes I'm also coaching up the coaches or coaching up the parents, so they have a language that's everybody understands and everyone knows what everybody means. For the really chattery player, telling them you got this immediately makes their chattery voice rise to the top of their head and say, you said that last time. Oh, no, you don't.
Right.
Um, and again, because that's sort of outcome based kind of encouragement, right? It sort of implies that you're going to win or not lose. Again, and for some players, you tell them you got this, they're like, damn right, I do. And they're going out there, they're ready to run through a brick wall.
Yeah.
We're talking about the players who you say you got this, and they immediately think about all the people who might be upset with them if they blow it.
Yeah. I mean, the
Yeah.
analogy that has been resonating with me recently, and I've repeated on this podcast and to some, coaches that I work with or whatever, is this idea that, right, if the player is the seed, right, the seed doesn't grow on its own. It's about the environment, right? It's the soil, it's the sun, it's the food that allows it to grow. And sometimes our job as a parent or coach is just to realize, hey, the environment is not allowing this seed to flourish, right? So the seed has its doubts and it's got its hard casing and all that. We need an environment where that happens. And I do think this is
Yeah.
really important that, if that mind chatter, if the voice in your head is your most influential coach in your life, right? Because it's the one you hear the most. Well, what is shaping that? And oftentimes, actions, sometimes intentional, sometimes not, by coaches, by parents, by teammates, really
Absolutely.
shape that voice, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate how you're saying, because most of my experience with coaches is they're happy to figure if there's something they can do to help, they're going to want to do it. And as you
Right. We want
said,
our people to play
it's
their best.
yeah, it's mostly unwitting and not intentional. And I really, what you're reminding me of is I think the work that I do with athletes, I think the work that we do with athletes, it's really important is to appreciate that your coach or your parent they may try to do this, but it's really up to you, not up to them. In other words, they have a whole team to worry about if you're a
Yeah.
coach. And so I want them to know if your parent says this to you, we're prepared for that. If coach says this to you and it turns out it was different than what the coach, said he might or she might say to you, we can handle all of that. Um, but once the player knows what buttons, you know, might get pushed, and they're prepared for those buttons to possibly get pushed, and they have a plan, which is sort of what the book is about how to manage it. Um, I want them to feel not like every coach or everybody has to cater to their specific anxious need, because that is seemingly impossible.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, I think parents are often also the same. I find most of the parents I work with, and I've worked with lots of parents over the last 20 years, most also want to know what they can do to help and are happy to not do this and a lot of it is because the parents chatter is also on high alert. In other words, the parents, of course, like anybody, have their own set of chatter about their child and what might happen, and they know how hard they've trained and they've invested so much time and energy that I get them to sort of talk about and think about how this is their own chatter, thinking if she doesn't play well in this tournament, um, this they could wind up seemingly in the gutter. I mean, if your chatter gets a hold of you and never be successful and have their own set of catastrophic thoughts and black and white thinking, and I get them to see that they're replicating the same thing that they're trying to get their child not to replicate, and I try to educate them on that. And I think um, most parents and coaches are open to hearing and listening, and if there's a way they can help, they're a go.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, I love that. I just had a thought around that, and I just kind of spaced it for a second. But I mean, I think that this is so important. Oh, I know what it is. So I get asked a lot of times by parents. They say, "Okay, yeah, we get this, the technical piece. What if I think my kid's not working hard, right? I really want to say something or whatever." And I always ask them, "Well, think about, let's go under. Why do you feel like they're not working hard?" It's like oftentimes something that we call not working hard is it's not that they don't care, right? It's that
Yeah,
they
point.
they can't do it. They don't know what to do, right? They don't have the competence to do it. And I mean, I get these parents. I'm like, well, how old's your kid? And they're like 9. I'm like, really, really? When you were 9, you never had an off day? Like, come on.
Yeah,
Yes, you did. Right. And
yeah,
we are asking our kids, and the environment today is asking our kids to be switched on every moment. Right. And
yeah,
and then as a parent, we feel like, oh my God, I'm letting my kids down if I don't sign them up for the extra all-star team or the extra speed skating camp or whatever it is. And so these kids are
yeah,
just on 24/7 under the gun. And then we get
yeah.
upset that they had an off day. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think and the parents are switched on. I mean, yes, the kids are switched on, but we're all parents are switched on now more than ever, wanting to think that they're not missing something, as you're saying, some extra workout. They're not holding their kids back from every opportunity that could help make them successful. And I think the kids fool us in some ways because they're so talented and they're so smart and they're so athletic and strong and fast that we forget that they are kids. We forget that they're like, I call them like little birds, that you could have this hulking football player who's 16 and being looked at by D1 schools and he's like a little boy inside, and as you said, might be terrified, even though he could run over somebody. Um, and the parents are switched on. It reminds me when my kids were little and Baby Einstein was the latest way that if you exposed your kids to Baby Einstein on the TV while they were like literally, 3 weeks old, and they could just sit in front of the TV, that they would read sooner and they would, have better reading comprehension. So what did parents do? Like me and my wife, we go, got to get Baby Einstein, like we
Yeah.
can't. But behind that, there's a lot of anxiety. Like
Yeah.
if my kid misses out on Baby Einstein, what if? And so, yes, the kids are switched on for all kinds of reasons. Part of it due to the fact that um, the parents, at least I'm working with, are incredibly switched on in so many ways and
Yeah.
chattery.
And chattery, right? And I think also what feeds into that chatter for today's parent versus I'm 52, right? My parents are in their 80s, right? When I was growing up and playing, they might have been aware of what some of the other kids on my team were doing extra or whatever, but they certainly weren't bombarded with, media and societal expectations, social media, all these things that makes you say, like, I grew up in New York and, my parents certainly weren't thinking, well, what's some parent in California doing for their 10-year-old that I'm not? Like that was not even on the radar. And yet that's on the
Yeah,
radar today. And so all these
yeah,
things are ingredients that feed into parental mind chatter that
yeah,
makes them say, you know what? I'm not going to ask my 10-year-old if they want to do this extra camp. I'm just going to sign them up and they'll comply when they're 10. But by 13, 14, those kids are like, yeah, I'm done. I'm burnt. I'm toast.
yeah, yeah. Obviously, there's so many ways, John, that it's different. Just being a good parent now is associated with raising a star athlete,
Straight A student,
and
star athlete involved in
star
17
students,
clubs.
star recruited athlete. And of course, that really, to this degree, certainly didn't exist. And for all the reasons you named. So I think it's important when you're working with the, that you don't just try to, sometimes I just work with the kids and sometimes I work with just the parents and sometimes it's both. And then of course, sometimes when with permission, it could include coaches as well. So as many people, we could sort of have the language, a shared language. Um, and, when a coach or a parent is able to say to a kid, let's just say, for example, if the kid's okay with hearing it from a parent, like, not like, oh, you should be more confident, but more like, hey, wow, your chatter is really on duty today. Like, am I right about that? Is it like showing up for duty? And like, and the kid could be like, yeah. At least there's more alignment than saying you should be confident. And the kid feels like you don't even get it. Like I'm busy freaking out behind the scenes here. You telling me I should be confident makes me feel more alone with this. So there's a lot of power behind all of this.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I love the phrase, and you've used it, and we've talked about it, mind chatter. And can you just kind of go through that again, right? So mind chatter, just define it again, because I remember I was reading the book and I emailed you. I was like, I love that because
Yeah,
I have mind chatter, right? As an adult, I'm not performing in sports anymore, but certainly I have
absolutely.
mind chatter when I'm chasing my kids around the ski mountain going, I probably shouldn't go off that thing they just went off of.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had to, decide, I had like some agents and say, do you want to just write this book about athletes? Because Mitch, and of course, it applies to everyone. I said, of
Yeah.
course, it applies to all of us, me included, of course. And but I really wanted to write it. So I came up with this term mind chatter years ago. And what was interesting, John, I would have a client, it still happens to this day, I could have a client for a first meeting in my office, and somewhere along the way I say, oh, I tell them what I think mind chatter is, which I'll say what it is in a minute, and we'll talk briefly about it, and then they'll leave and they'll come back a week or two later and they'll say, Doc, like, oh, my mind chatter was crazy before the game, but guess what? I scored like in the first 3 minutes, and then like I didn't even know it was there anymore. But the point was, I noticed they're using this term, and I haven't really spent a lot of energy going through it. And so for years, I kept hearing people just respond to the terminology,
Yeah.
and to me, it's not a pathological sounding. It's not too psychological sounding. It's
Yeah.
not too, branding of a name. And So for me, chatter is the conversation we have with ourselves that's full of doubt, second guessing, and negative thinking.
Hmm.
And the big piece of this puzzle is that, as we've sort of alluded to, it doesn't show up randomly. It might not show up on a typical Tuesday afternoon practice where you guys are going over the drills, you're going over a couple skills, maybe you're kind of working through a play. It's not going to show up on a day like that because it always shows up under two conditions: when there's a lot of uncertainty and high stakes.
Right.
So that it's not that practices can't have high stakes. Absolutely, some practices can have high stakes. But in a general way, if you're just sort of going through typical practice stuff, an athlete might say, "Yeah, I'm not really having much chatter. I'm just sort of, if I mess up, I mess up. You know, if I'm in the wrong place, the coach says, get your butt over there, and I get my butt over there." Um, but of course, sports, the reason we're talking about this really is high stakes for a lot of people. Not just where I might go play, if I'm going to make the team in the tryout, but maybe where I'm going to college. Am I going to make the Olympic trials? Is my son or daughter going to make it all? Is going to make it? And so sports has become so high stakes for all the reasons we've talked about. I feel like there's more chatter than ever, and more of a need for people to kind of learn how to manage it.
Yeah, and I think that, when we talk about where we have uncertainty, where we have stakes, that's also where growth happens, right? So you're not going to get better unless you have challenge and uncertainty. Um,
Yeah,
that's sort of the conditions for signing up, and I think that's part of it. It's like,
yeah,
what you signed up to have uncertainty, to have
yeah.
challenge, and to have mind chatter. Like, you signed up for it. So stop thinking there's something wrong with you. It's actually was in the terms and conditions of your playing agreement.
Yes, they signed up. They did sign up for that, but what they didn't know they signed up for is that chatter was going to come along for the ride.
Yeah.
I think that's the part for them that's a blind spot. In other words, I tell them, yes, you show up to the championship game, and so does your chatter. Like, you never show up alone, and I'm not talking about your teammates or your opponents. So I think it's helpful to let people know that this is in fact where growth is, and you're right, and what they signed up for. But it's very easy to lose sight of it if there's a voice that's sort of on top of you, so to
Hmm.
speak. And I'll sometimes do this little silly hand gesture where this is your chatter and this is you, and sort of like, it's sort of like you're here trying to kick the ball and kind of run the plays, but chatter is sort of on top of you, and my job is to help flip it so that
Yeah.
here's you, now your chatter's here, now it's still got something to say, it's going to let you know when you mess up, but hopefully you feel like more the power's inside of you instead of it inside the chatter. So
Yeah.
um yeah, and it's exciting when people come to realize that they have more choice in how this is going to go than they previously realized.
Yeah, there's a great part in the book, and I'll look it up for you if you want. When people always ask me about my books, and you're like, "Remember on page 32 when you wrote this?" I'm like, "No,"
I
right?
won't remember that.
But what you said is, like, what are some of the things that when athletes, that will what does that mind chatter say and do? And you kind of had a list of like, hey, these are phrases they might use, or this is what it will cause them. Can you go through that? And I can look it up if you want me to.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, mind chatter, a sure sign or clue, of course, is it starts with a question, like a what if type of question. Like,
Yeah.
what if I don't score in this game because I didn't score in the last one? What if my coach is going to pull me out um, because he or she sees that I'm underperforming? Um, what if my parents get sick and tired of driving me around to these tournaments because I know how much money and time they put into my athletic pursuits?
Hmm.
What if I make a mistake at the beginning of the game because I know every time I make a mistake at the beginning of the game, I never recover from it? Um, what if the college coaches watching are more impressed with what she's doing or he's doing than with what I'm doing? So
Hmm.
the comparison kind of questions. What if I don't meet expectations? What if people are disappointed in me? I'm sure there may be more on that list, but that I think gives people a sense of worrying about future you, right? So it's what's going to happen to future me.
Yeah.
Some people call it nexting, Nexting, next.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to future me? Um, and of course, it's all hinges on the result, right?
Yeah.
Like I can only be really disappointed if the result isn't good. My parents can only be mad at me if the result isn't good. The coach will only push me, take me out if it's a bad result. So it's kind of a double whammy effect. It's got both the worrying about something that hasn't happened yet, and it's only going to make you more and more nervous because it's focused on outcomes, which of course you can't directly control the outcomes. And so it's got a lot wrong with it, but
Yeah.
those are some of the telltale signs.
Yeah, it's focused on outcomes. It's focused on uncontrollables, and you have this list. Yeah, you hit most of them, and I like the list. Right, it makes you hesitate instead of being assertive. It makes you pass and not shoot, slow down instead of speed up, worry about other people's opinions rather than your own performance, aim for perfection when you know that mistakes are inevitable. I mean, there's no one
Yeah.
listening to this who hasn't coached that player. There's probably no one listening to this that hasn't felt those same thoughts and uttered those same sentences, right? So again, welcome to being
Yes.
human.
Yes, yes, but again, I feel like it's the sort of thing, as you know, and I appreciate being here, where it's not talked about enough. We're doing drills and skills and plays, and we're in the weight room, but again, it's hard to get this information out there to kids in a sense that says, believe it or not, your chatter's supposed to be there. It's doing its job. It's normal, and and as you're saying, I think there's more to this, as you know, which is I want them to make room for the chatter. And maybe this is, that 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 there is sort of a process and a means that I go about teaching people, not just that it's normal, because I don't think that goes far enough. I want there to be more, I want them to understand that there's this making room, and an athlete, or you might go making room. Like, what the heck does that mean? I go, great question. Let's talk about what that means. How do we, and I try to give as many examples of, it could be, that kid in the back of your classroom who's like always asking the worst questions of the teacher. Like, and when it first starts asking those questions, you're always turning around, telling him to shut up or her to shut up and like stop. And it's annoying. But eventually you sort of have to come to this space in the classroom where you're like, he's just sort of part of what's going to happen. And the more I turn around and tell him to be quiet, the more he's going to like, find ways to sort of stick it to me. And
And it's
so
not
I'm
gonna
always
he's
looking
not
for
gonna
ways
shut
to
up
keep,
because I turned around or paid
and he's not
attention
going
to
to shut up because you turned around. And in fact, he's taking you away from doing the kind of work that you're capable of doing. And so there are a number of ways, multiple ways that I try to get them to not just normalize it, but figure out a way to get on top of it by appreciating that there's some strategies that they can use to quiet it to some degree, to give it less power over them. And then I may be moving too far ahead, but then there's a whole chapter, as you know, on the mind that needs to be occupied somewhere. And that's when we get finally, now we get to talk about the game. Like, you're a soccer player, like, okay, where should you be focused?
hmm
A lot of players know they shouldn't be focused on what the chatter's telling them to do, but they don't know where they should be focused. And that to me is some of the most fun parts of my work, because I don't necessarily just tell them focus here. It's a conversation that we have based on where they're looking to get better, what their coaches sort of offer in this. I'll ask, if your coach was sitting here right now, what would he say? What would she say? Uh, and that to me is where you get really creative with the athlete about finding ways to let chatter be, and then to kind of get yourself focused in on a couple of what I call kind of action goals, because
hmm
chatter isn't interested in the action.
hmm
It's interested in your possible demise and your whole reputation and identity going up in smoke in
hmm
one game.
hmm And so this starts, right? You talk about sort of this process of number one, accept that it's going to appear, right? Number two, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Number three, right? Telling yourself to think positively, like we talked about before, when it's not how you feel is not the answer. It'll probably make you feel worse. So let's get into some of the tools that you teach in this book. What are some of the favorite things? Or if I'm a coach right now and I'm thinking, all right, I'm coaching, I know I know one kid stands out on my team right now that they make that early mistake that even you hear them in practice, they're talk to themselves when they hit a bad pass or miss a shot. Where do we start?
Well, we would start by not just picking this kid out of a picking him out of the lineup, we would have your whole team learn these strategies,
Hmm.
I think, because
Yeah.
while he might be the most obvious, you might have even some of your top players. I've always been struck by some of the best athletes in the world that I've coached, some pros who will hide after they get their stats to a certain point. So they don't look at their box score that night and see 5 more misses at the end of the game. So I wouldn't assume it's just him, although he might be the most obvious.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
like that. That's
And then
important, right? These are tools for
yeah,
everybody.
these are tools for everybody. And as you said, I've had kids over the years who sort of it's not totally relatable because they're like, I just go out there and just get after it, and they're really not too chattery at all. And that certainly does exist. Um, so we would want the team to know about chatter. And for someone like him, if he buys into this, we could have coaches like you. Um, we would go through a game plan of like, he already knows on a Tuesday what his chatter is going to say on that Saturday at the game when he makes the mistake. And as you know, in the book, I have several sort of exercises or worksheets where people can predict with a lot of certainty what their chatter is going to say after that mistake. And then we go through what their old response was, which was like, try not to think about it, or, oh my God, my coach is going to pull me out, or I suck, or some variation on all of that. And then we have this new sort of modern way of looking at it where their response could be something like, John, where they're thanking their chatter for sharing. And of course, that requires, and your little giggle, and a lot of times the kids will giggle because they get it. It's got a little sarcasm to it, but it's this idea that they become clear that they show up to the game looking to make the best passes they can and get to the goal and help their team win. Or we would go through a lot of that,
Yeah.
in more in depth. Yeah. And that their chatter has a completely other agenda, which
Uh-huh.
is interested in all the demise and the possible embarrassment that comes with it. And so thanking your chatter for sharing is just sort of one way of sort of saying, like, I hear you, but I don't necessarily need to buy into everything you're trying to get me to sell. You're trying to sell to me, rather. Um, Other people, we have them kind of say to themselves, I'm having the chattery thought that this mistake I'll never recover from, which is a whole lot different than saying to yourself, I'm never going to recover from this one,
Yeah.
versus I'm having the chattery thought that this might be the kind of mistake I can't recover from. It creates a little bit more distance. It's almost like that, which is what I'm going for here, that it's sort of not you that's causing the trouble.
Yeah.
Because these kids, this player on your team, John, knows he's not a dummy. He knows that Jimmy and John and Fred on the team make mistakes.
Hmm.
He knows John last game blew a goal in the last 5 minutes. He intellectually gets it, but he doesn't have the tools yet to figure out how to, like, let it be. And
Yeah.
so I have a number of those types of suggestions. And then the next thing I'd be doing with this player or whoever is we'd be talking about where do they want to put their attention? What are their cues? What does their sort of reset look like?
Yeah.
Where should their focus be? And we try to tailor that to each particular kid.
Yeah. So I laugh because I told you off camera beforehand. I went and did a yoga class before our interview today, and I was pretty sore and struggling, and the teacher kept saying, "Right now I am here." That was sort of the mantra. Right now I'm here, right? And so you're sitting there going, God, I could touch my toes last week. Why can't I do it now? And you're like, oh, right now I'm here, right? And so I can get angry about it,
Yes.
or I can
Yeah.
just say, accept that I'm here
Yeah.
and work
Yeah.
through it.
Yeah. And just along those lines, I think it's a very good point for coaches to appreciate the guy on your team isn't um he's not as upset about it's not the mistake per se that's the problem. It's the meaning that he's attached to the mistake, which is that this means this is another bad game. This means I'm not as good as the other forward.
Right.
This means the recruitment is
Here
less
we here we go
possible.
again. Yeah.
Here we go again, right? As I put in the book, our mind time travels. So it doesn't just think about the end of the game. It's thinking about the last time
Hmm.
this happened. And before you know it, this sort of be here now idea.
Yeah.
This is why I teach kids. And I think it's a light bulb for them. I'm like, this is why it's so hard to be in the moment.
Yeah.
It's like, we're sort of like, it's like there's a bunch of like defenders trying to like get in our way, and we're trying to get to this, we're trying to get a touchdown, but there's a lot of guys trying to tackle us. It's like there's
Yeah.
reasons why it's hard to get to the end zone and to just be focus on next play. Like a lot of coaches will say next play. Of course, I know what they mean by that. The
Yeah.
kid knows what they mean, but I want them to understand it's not so easy to just do next play, but here's why, and then here's how we could hopefully get you closer to that.
Yeah. So some of these tools, right? We're setting goals. Talk about like a typical mistake ritual, because that's something that I think a lot of coaches, right, can say, okay, you made a mistake. What are some of like an example or two of a mistake ritual that you might, come up with an athlete to say, when you miss that free throw, what do you do? Or when you
Yeah.
miss that penalty kick, what do you do?
So a softball player the other day, she with big goals, big results and outcome goals in her she hopes for her future. Um she amongst the things that we talked about that she really liked, and this sort of we both is after that home run ball she gives up or that walked batter, she has a process where she goes behind the plate, behind the rubber, I'm sorry, in the back of the mound, and kind of like she loved the idea. She's really good at. So, by the way, when I work with athletes, I have this giant whiteboard in my office, and
Uh-huh.
I make things gigantically visible and visual. I don't
Hmm.
just sit across from them in a more traditional way generally.
Hmm.
And she liked this idea of like this creating this circle with her cleat behind that sort of exists behind the mound that only she really knows what it means.
Uh-huh.
And so for her, this is sort of making space and making room for the mistake and making room for the chatter. And she sort of has like a place to kind of put it, if you will, um, afterwards. And then she's got a couple of steps before she gets back to the rubber. That includes a little bit of a breath, which a lot of people encourage, and I would encourage as well. Not not too many breaths, but just a
Yeah.
few breaths. Um, uh, but the key piece is the ritual, and that's just a small example of one. But the key piece of it all is she's not caught by surprise because we've planned for it before the game. We've gone through it, giving herself how many mistakes, how many balls, how many like home run balls might you be willing to give up today? That doesn't mean you want home run balls to be being given up, but you're sort of understanding that you're not going to be a perfect specimen out there, and you're giving yourself some grace and some space to be less than perfect. Um, so that might be one. If it was, what did you give an example of? What kind of sport was it that you said to me?
Oh, I mean, it could be any. It
Uh,
could be basketball and you missed a free throw,
yeah,
soccer, you missed a penalty kick, or
yeah,
you missed an easy chance.
yeah, yeah. So it would be it could be, um, I think sometimes in some cases, let's do the free throw. Um, we we might want them to have some sort of soft, gentle focus on something related to execution. And if now I get it. A lot of athletes, and you might be thinking, I don't want my players to be like so crazy focused on something and overthinking the, where their elbow is. But I might say to them, when you're the best free throw shooter you can be, what are some of the keys? And they might say balance and elbow. And we might get to the point where their key words are balance and elbow.
Right.
So, and they know what balance means. They'll show it to me in my office, or they'll get up if it's a virtual one and show me in their space. And we kind of go through what elbow looks like a nice elbow. So we might let the chatter be. We might have some ritual where they're sort of wiping it away or wiping it off, taking a breath,
Yeah.
and then they might be able to say to themselves, balance and elbow, and balance when they're balancing, and elbow when they get their elbow up in a gentle way. And that can occupy the mind enough, focused on things that, because of course, the more their elbow is in the proper position, the better chance the ball's going to go in the hoop. So I'm I'm hoping to kind of do both things, help them manage their chatter and get them back to some execution that they need sometimes reminders of that
Yeah.
can help them perform better.
Yeah.
Does that
No,
make sense?
no, it totally makes sense. And, I think it's, just helping, people with that So it's like, be where your feet are, get your mind off the last play, get it on the next one. Um, is so critical that you just have these and this expectation. I mean, I've had multiple special forces and Navy SEALs on this podcast, and the Navy SEALs always
Yeah,
talk about what do we do, right? We practice for when things go wrong, right? We don't
yeah,
practice when everything works out swimmingly and the building looks like the building, and we practice for when the helicopter crashes. So that if things go well, oh,
right.
well, that was easy. And if things go wrong, we've been here before. And I think that's it as well. I'm going to give up a home run. I'm going to give up a goal. Okay. That's just how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I make sure with the kids, I go, okay, this all sounds really great with us sitting in our chairs here chatting, or up at the board. I go, now we have to poke some major holes in this. Why won't this work?
Yeah.
What's going to make, it sounds good, sounds very clean and easy, but I'm not sure, let's figure out why this maybe won't work. And all of a sudden you might hear, well, when my dad yells out from the stands, you know, you know, loosen up or whatever, or
Yeah.
just relax. Immediately, I go, okay, so we've come up with a nice plan, but we have to account for that now.
Yeah.
Or, it's the fourth quarter versus the first quarter, or, um, so we go through it, and I think the kids appreciate it. They spend so much time working on that physical game. They have somebody who sort of partners with them around all the possible, mental obstacles that they're going to have to go, jump over. And so now we go there, we have them going into the game trying to win the mental game. I go, let's not even try to win the physical game per se. Let's try to nail it on the three things that we agree are key, whatever that might be.
Yeah. And yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, and I'm just giving them as many reminders. I'm making audios for them, for those who want them. Sometimes we're doing a little quick text the night before, not too much, not for those
Yeah.
who aren't interested, because it's easy to do it here
Yeah.
conversationally when it's harder to do it when it counts. And of course, I'm very clear. I want them to be able to show up and make sure they remember what they need to remember when they need to remember it.
Right. Not pile it on. As the great American philosopher Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you pulling this all together, right? I mean, this is kind of what you call playing with courage, right? Not searching for confidence, but so define courage for you. What is courage?
Well, courage is, well, you can't be, I explained to them that you can't be courageous except in the presence of doubt and fear. By
Mm,
definition, fear always precedes courageous action. So where I go with these athletes is we have this wonderful opportunity now that we've given up on trying to be confident if we're not. But hope is not lost. This is an opportunity for you to be courageous. And then, of course, there's lots of conversation about what that means and what that looks like for them and who in their life might be courageous and what would it mean to be courageous out there. And it's this idea that there's this voice telling me that I need to pass, but it would take a lot of courage to go take that lane because it's open on the lacrosse field
mm,
and make that dodge because I know it's an open lane and I've been training it.
yeah.
And for a lot of the kids, they don't feel confident. And I go, of course, you're not going to feel confident not doing that, especially if it didn't go well the last time, but you don't need to be confident to play well. If you're willing to have these doubts and if you're willing to kind of make room for them in the ways that we've described, um, uh, there are some opportunities for you to discover how courageous you can be. And they really get excited about this and they really get interested in this as another way to look at it, that I don't have to be confident, which is how they've spent so much energy a lot of their athletic lives.
Right.
Um, um, and we go through examples like those who climb Mount Everest. If you ask them if they're confident they're going to summit, they would kind of laugh at you thinking confident, like, the winds can change in 3 hours from now and I'm blown off the mountain. But we would say they have the utmost courage in the face of possible death to figure out a way to go one step at a time and work with their teammates to their
And
climbing mates
and
to get
step
to the
over
top.
dead bodies. Like, how are you going to be confident
Over.
when you're stepping over a dead body? Well, that's not
Yeah, you
confident. That's
think,
just having
yeah,
courage that I have the tools in the
yeah,
moment to do what needs to be done.
yeah. So we spend a lot of a lot of time also on this piece of courage over confidence. I've got wristbands that I've got that say courage over confidence.
Yeah.
We've got things that, they could switch wristbands from one wrist to another when they feel like they need it. We're trying to come up with ways like to kind of feel like they're embracing this. And then it could be sometimes in practice. I'm always looking for opportunities, whether it's a practice for them to try this, of course, a game situation, just a quarter. And I think one of the important things for the listeners to appreciate too is if you are like 15% better at this, the things that we're talking about today, John, like whatever 15% means. If you're 15% more planful, you're 15% more welcoming of chatter, you're 15% more engaged in the plan to make room for it and then to get focused on goals, that could mean a tremendous
Yeah.
improvement.
Yeah.
It's not like our players, if we use the player on your team, that he has to turn into somebody else. Like he has to be like a Godzilla, like the other kid on the team who would run through a wall. Like we're not trying to turn you into somebody else, but if you are just a little bit more switched on when it matters the most, in just even small ways, that could open up a lot of interesting doors for you, and it excites the athletes to try it out,
Yeah.
and know I'm there to kind of then discuss what worked, what didn't work, and
Yeah.
um, it's great. It's great fun for me,
Yeah.
and a great challenge for the athletes.
Awesome. Well, that was great and great way. And I was just writing down, can't be courageous except in the presence of doubt and fear is a huge thing, right? And that analogy of lacrosse, right? You're not going to feel confident if you miss the last thing, but you still can be courageous in that moment
That's right.
because the game calls for you to take that shot. And I mean, that's
Yeah,
that's it in a nutshell. Tell
yeah.
people where they can get the book, and then also website and any parting thoughts you have for our audience.
Well, thank you. So the book is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It's titled Courage Over Confidence, Managing Mind Chatter and Winning the Mental Game. Um, I'm pretty active on Instagram now and which is Green Psych, GreenEnepsych, and Facebook to some degree. We're revamping our website, but I have a website which is greenpsych.com,
Mhm.
where you could also read a little bit more about the things we're doing here in Philly. And um, um, I don't think I have more to say except I'm always open for those who are interested to learn more about this. I do occasional sort of master classes in this for
Mm.
coaches or for athletes or parents, and sort of busy doing a lot of that. And in addition to my individual work. So if you have questions or interest, reach out.
Awesome. Well, Mitch, thank you so much. Great chat. I got lots of notes. Again, I highly recommend the book. I know on the website there is your email, and you can do
Yep.
discount bulk orders and stuff because this is like the type of book I think is a great team read and work through as a team. It's simple, it's easy, it's very actionable. So thank you for your great work and your great contribution here, and thanks for being on the way, champions.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for listening. Again, thanks to Mitch Greene. You can find him Greene, Greene, psych, psych.com, at Green Psych on Instagram as well. And the book is Courage Over Confidence, Managing Mind Chatter and Winning the Mental Game. Again, a great team read and simple, easy, great ideas as a coach as well to recognize things in players. And maybe, when they don't have access to a sports psychologist, we're incorporating it into our own practices as well. Lots of stuff in this book that I've been thinking about and talking about with my teams as well. Thanks to our amazing Patreon podcast champions. Again, if you want to support us on Patreon, go to patreon.com/way of champions. Reminder, oh, well, of course, thank you to Sprocket Sports. And reminder as well, the Way of Champions 2024, August 8th, 9th, and 10th. And just go to changethegameproject.com and you can get signed up. There is an early bird discount, so save yourself $100. Book one of those elusive hotel rooms early and everything like that. All right. So remember, everyone, your influence is never neutral. So go out there, make a difference this week. Teach your players to have courage over confidence. We'll see you again next week.